one signature, and money was never the same again. For centuries, gold was the anchor of wealth. Nations trusted it. People demanded it. Every coin, every dollar, every empire was tied to it. But in 1971, the system broke. Overnight, the dollar lost its link to gold, and with it, the entire world entered a new financial era: inflation, debt, crises, growth. All of it traces back to that single moment. This is the story of how the gold standard collapsed and how one decision still shapes the money in your pocket today. For thousands of years, gold wasn't just a metal, it was money itself. From the pharaohs of Egypt, to the merchants of Rome, to the kings of medieval Europe, gold carried the same weight everywhere. Why? Because it was rare, because it was beautiful, because no empire could simply print more of it. By the 19th century, the idea became official: the gold standard. Every banknote, every coin, every promise of value was backed by gold. If you held paper money, you could walk into a bank and demand the gold behind it. And that simple rule created something priceless: trust. Nations trusted each other's currencies. Merchants trusted that the money in their hand was real. Ordinary people trusted that the value of their savings would hold. It wasn't perfect. Wars drained treasuries. Gold shipments were stolen. Crises forced governments to suspend payments. But still, for more than a century, gold was the anchor. It kept economies stable. It kept money honest. And then came the cracks. The gold standard promised stability, but the 20th century brought chaos. World War I exploded across Europe. Governments needed money, fast, but their gold reserves couldn't keep up. So they printed paper, they borrowed, they suspended gold payments, and the first cracks appeared. After the war, nations tried to return to gold, but the world had changed. By the 1930s, the Great Depression crushed economies, banks failed, unemployment soared, and once again, governments turned to printing money. Gold was supposed to limit that, but politicians couldn't resist breaking the rules. Then came World War II. The costs were staggering. Armies, tanks, planes, all needed financing far beyond what gold reserves could cover. By 1944, the world needed a new system. That system was Bretton Woods. The idea was simple: the US dollar would become the center of global finance. Other currencies would be tied to the dollar, and the dollar itself would still be backed by gold, at $35 an ounce. It was meant to be the best of both worlds: flexibility for governments, but still anchored in gold. But there was a problem. The US printed more and more dollars to fund its economy, to pay for the Cold War, to fight in Vietnam, and as the dollars piled up, foreign governments began to wonder, did America really have enough gold to back them all? The cracks in the system were widening, and soon they would shatter. By the late 1960s, the world had lost faith in the dollar. America was fighting the war in Vietnam, pouring money into weapons, soldiers, and supplies. At the same time, President Johnson's Great Society programs expanded spending at home. The result? The US was printing dollars at a pace no gold reserve could match. Foreign governments noticed. France, under President Charles de Gaulle, even sent warships across the Atlantic to collect gold in exchange for their dollars. Other countries lined up too, demanding gold for the paper they held. The numbers didn't add up. By 1971, America had around $50 billion in outstanding obligations. but less than $10 billion in gold to cover it. The system was on the edge of collapse. Then came the night of August 15th, 1971. Millions of Americans turned on their televisions to watch President Richard Nixon. He spoke calmly, but his words shook the financial world. "I have directed Secretary Connolly to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold." Temporarily, but that temporary suspension was never lifted. The dollar, once as good as gold, was now backed by nothing but trust. The gold standard was over, and the world had entered the age of fiat money, money valuable only because governments say so, and because people believe it. The announcement sent shockwaves across the globe. The dollar was no longer tied to gold, and almost overnight, the rules of money had changed. At first, some thought it might stabilize things, but instead, chaos followed. Currencies that were once fixed to the dollar suddenly began to float. Exchange rates swung wildly. For the first time in modern history, money had no anchor. And then came inflation. Freed from the limits of gold, governments discovered how easy it was to print more money. The US flooded its economy with dollars. Other nations did the same. Prices climbed higher and higher. By the mid-1970s, inflation in America hit double digits. The cost of everyday life soared. Savings lost value. Ordinary families struggled to keep up. And then came the oil crisis. In 1973, OPEC, the oil cartel led by Middle Eastern producers, cut supplies and raised prices. The dollar, no longer backed by gold, sank in credibility. Gas lines stretched for miles. Energy costs exploded. The word of the decade became stagflation, a nightmare combination of rising prices and stagnant growth. It was something the old gold system had tried to prevent. Now, it was reality. What Nixon had framed as a temporary measure had unleashed a permanent transformation. The gold standard was dead, and the world was learning what it meant to live in a fiat system. After 1971, there was no going back. The gold standard was gone, and the era of fiat money had begun. For governments, it was liberating. No longer chained to gold, they could print, borrow, and spend as much as needed. In times of crisis, central banks could flood economies with liquidity. In theory, it meant more flexibility and faster recovery. But there was a cost. Debt soared to levels once unimaginable. Inflation became a constant shadow, and the discipline of gold, the natural brake on overspending, was lost. Over the decades, we saw the consequences, the boom and bust cycles of the late 20th century. The 2008 financial crisis, fueled by easy credit and massive leverage. The unprecedented money printing during the COVID-19 pandemic. Every step traced back to that night in 1971. One decision, one signature, and the world learned to live with money backed only by trust. Today, the dollar, the euro, the yen, none are tied to gold. All are fiat currencies, and they work only as long as people believe in them. It raises a haunting question. What happens if that trust is ever broken? History remembers wars, presidents, and revolutions, but sometimes the most powerful change comes from a single signature. In 1971, Nixon didn't just end the gold standard. He created the world we live in today, a world of fiat money, endless debt, and economies built on trust alone. So here's my question to you. Do you think the world would be better off if money was still backed by gold? Or is fiat currency the price we pay for modern growth. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. And if you want to uncover more hidden stories of how money shaped history, don't forget to subscribe to Economic Chronicles. Because history isn't just about kings and battles. It's about the economics that built our world.